Thank you to all who have helped me. Is this turned on? Better? Okay. So the dispersed codices made at the beginning of the 14th century for Sultan Uljaytu and the Il-Khanid court rank among the most spectacular Qur'an manuscripts known. Of the 5 surviving copies, selections from 2 of them are right here on display. One is the Mosul Qur'an, commissioned from that city for the Sultan by his 2 viziers. The other is the even larger Uljaytu Qur'an, commissioned around the same time by the Sultan himself from the capital Baghdad for his tomb at Sultaniya. And I'd like to thank right away Masume Farhad, Zainab Simari, and Sana Mirza, both for the wonderful images they've given me and also for all the help they've provided in getting me here. Each of these imperial Qur'an manuscripts comprises a set of 30 volumes, ajza, and we heard last night in that excellent introduction about the different ways you could divide up the Qur'an. These are all 30-volume sets. Each complete juz, each complete volume, has 60 to 70 folios, very large sheets of paper, with bold calligraphy and elaborate decoration in gold, ultramarine, and other expensive pigments. Each manuscript took years to produce, typically by a team of craftsmen. I think we can see we're post-Ghaznavid. We've moved on, but we're in very much the same tradition as the previous speaker's paper. And what I would like to do here is to look in detail at these imperial manuscripts, especially this one, the enormous manuscript made for the Sultan himself, to investigate how they were made, how they were used, where and how they have been preserved, and how their function has evolved. So let's begin with how these manuscripts were made. Each of these imperial Il-Khanid Qur'ans was made on very large sheets of fine, polished paper. The Mamluk chronicler, Al-Kalkashandi, enumerated the 9 sizes of paper that were standard during this period. The largest were full-size Baghdadi sheets, each, he says, measuring a cubit by a cubit and a half of Egyptian linen. Comparing the proportions and measurements to extant manuscripts, we can calculate that this description of a full Baghdadi sheet measures a trimmed sheet approximately 70 by 100 centimeters, 31 by 39 inches. The full Baghdadi sheet was used for the largest Qur'an manuscript of that period, this enormous one commissioned by the Sultan himself for his tomb. Folding each sheet down the middle gives page dimensions of 50 by 70 centimeters. And as Jonathan Bloom, who we've heard about already, has shown, there's a practical reason for this size. This is about the limit of what a papermaker can lift from the mold. The enormous manuscript made for the Sultan's tomb is the only manuscript of this enormous size from the period. Other manuscripts, including the other imperial Qur'ans, are half this size, what Kalkashandi called half Baghdadi. One example is the dispersed Qur'an Codex copied by Ahmad as-Suhrawardi at Baghdad, probably for Uljaytu's predecessor Ghazan. All the codices made for Uljaytu's vizier, Rashid ad-Din, fit this half Baghdadi size, whether a Qur'an manuscript or a historical one. Still, other manuscripts from the period are 1/4 this size, including many single-volume manuscripts that were written by Yaqut al-Mustasimi and other calligraphers, and we're going to hear about some of those tomorrow. Such proportions are easily obtained by folding the full Baghdadi sheets into halves, quarters, or eighths. These large sheets must have been expensive, particularly in view of the almost profligate use of paper in the imperial Qur'an manuscripts, in which regular text pages have only 5 lines of script surrounded by wide blank spaces. Compare here the 2 pages on the right from imperial Qur'an manuscripts with the more condensed text on the left from a quarto-sized manuscript penned by Yaqut al-Mustasimi. And I've sized the illustrations here so you can get an idea of the difference. To make the enormous Qur'an manuscript for Uljaytu, the one on the right, required 1,000 sheets of this full Baghdadi size. So similar, again, to the ones that François de Roche was talking about from the Umayyad period, but always paper now and not parchment as in the early period. The other imperial Qur'an manuscripts consumed about half that amount, 500 sheets of paper. But in contrast, the small volume by Yaqut took a mere 35 folios. Calligraphy confirms the expense of these imperial manuscripts. The text on them is written in the majestic script known as Muhaqqaq, exact, and we have the world's expert on Muhaqqaq here in our audience with us, who's written a very good book on the subject. This was one of the 6 pens standard in the period. In Muhaqqaq, diacritical marks for vowels and other punctuation are written with a smaller pen. Most manuscripts, like the one you see here, are written in dark black ink. This is the dispersed Qur'an by Ahmad as-Suhrawardi. The Mosul Qur'an is fancier. It has text written in gold, outlined in black, and black for the diacritical marks. The Uljaytu Qur'an is the fanciest of all. Each page contains 3 lines of gold script, outlined in black, sandwiching 2 lines of black script outlined in gold, with diacritical marks added in the same inks. Transcribing the Mosul Qur'an, therefore, required 3 instruments: a wide pen for the gold letters, a thinner pen for the black diacritical marks, and a brush for the black outlines. Transcribing the Uljaytu Qur'an, the one on the right, required 6 implements: 2 wide pens for the gold and black letters, 2 thinner pens for the gold and black diacritical marks, and 2 brushes to outline the letters. All this changing of implements takes time and therefore means more money. Each of these imperial manuscripts also uses an extraordinary amount of gold, a substance much prized by the Mongols, and Thomas Olson has written extensively on this subject. This is very clear in the elaborately decorated double frontispieces to each of the 30 volumes. And remember, we have 30 of these things to deal with in the Uljaytu Qur'an. And I show you here the left half of one in the Topkapi and the right half of another volume in Leipzig. And the difference is mainly to where I took them from. One is from the difference in color. The one on the left is from James's monograph, and the one on the right from a PDF that's online of the Leipzig collection. The copious amount of gold is also clear in the opening and closing text pages to each of the 30 volumes. And again, I show you here text from the text spread from volume 17 on the left, which is right here on display. The volume is on display, and half of the closing from Juz 1 in Leipzig. So each volume, each of 30 volumes, had a double page spread like this at the beginning and the end of the volume. Calligraphing the text took even more gold. Close examination of the pages shows that there were 2 different ways of applying the gold, and this pertains to the question that Abu Sudavar asked this morning about how the gold was applied. According to Beate Weissmuller, who was the former curator at Leipzig University, and I should go back to that page because we have Leipzig here, she kindly examined their pages for me in 2012 and showed or pointed out, learned, that the calligraphy and outlining were done in gold ink, producing a very granular surface. The illumination, by contrast, and that's what you see here, illumination, was done with gold leaf, sheets of gold that are hammered to extreme thinness and laid on some sort of sticky substance to produce a more even surface, something like aluminum foil. Examining this unfinished page from the Uljaytu Qur'an now in Copenhagen shows how the illuminator would have laid the gold leaf. He first painted the area to be decorated with a tint to provide a colored ground from the gold. So this is similar to the red that Abu was talking about. And we're talking about the marginal rosette, which you see blown up here on the right, which is the bottom right of the page on the left. In this case, this is the large roundel marking the 10th verse of Surah 41, as well as the smaller circle in the text marking the end of the same verse. So am I going to get a pointer if I... So there we are, it's the small one and round here. That's just ground. There's no gold yet. The next step, which has not been undertaken yet here, would have been to paint this area with glue, size, or what's known as glare, and then apply the gold leaf to the surface, brushing away and collecting any particles that did not adhere to the sticky substance. Unless you don't understand why they collect all these gold fragments, I don't know if you read about this robbery in New York recently where someone walked off with a pail of gold little fragments like this, and how much was it worth? 1.6 million. So I think we might think again about the cost of gold going into the manuscript. It was just on the back of a truck, and the guy went to look at what was going on in the engine and walked off with this pail. All right. The advantage of leaf is that it actually uses much, much less gold because you can hammer the sheets so thinly. To produce the gold ink that's used for the text and the outlining in this Qur'an requires much, much more gold and also far more time. To make gold ink, and this is the period exactly when gold ink is beginning to be produced, both in Iran and in Italy, you have to grind up gold leaf with honey or gum arabic, and then wash away the medium, leaving gold dust or powder that's suspended in a water-soluble solution and dried into a little lump. This kind of gold is traditionally called shell gold, as Europeans made it in mussel shells, or sat the little lump in mussel shells. One method on the web today describing how to make your own gold ink ends up with the comment, "Good luck," and says, just go out and pay for the really expensive little tube of gold ink. It is incredibly expensive. And you have to realize we are talking of 30 volumes with every other line written in this gold ink. This detail of the page in Copenhagen shows the sequence of steps that we heard about earlier today that the calligrapher and the illuminator would have taken in completing a text page. First came the calligraphy and the diacritical marks in gold and black ink. Next, the letters were outlined with the contrasting color. And you can see up here, I've shown you the detail, as the thin outlines run over the thicker lines of the script. And a final stage, and that's what's not been done here, would have been to add the gold illumination where they've just tinted the ground here. These details are interesting not just because of the way they show us how the manuscript was made. They also show that the volumes were not executed in sequential order. The unfinished pages in Copenhagen come from Juz 24. Other unfinished pages in Dresden come from Juz 28. And these ones lack the textual markers. Those are just the grounds you see painted here. They lack the chapter headings. But although these pages in Juz 24 and 28 are unfinished, pages from a later volume, Juz 29, in Leipzig, are complete, including the chapter headings. Dates in contemporary Qur'an manuscripts, such as this one, a 30-volume copy made in Maragay by an aged Qadi, show that not all manuscripts were executed in sequence. This one we're lucky, and I have to thank Sirpil Bakci, who's also here for help with this publication. The dates in the many colophons to the Maragay Quran of 1338 show that the calligrapher, who was the same throughout the manuscript, did not copy the text sequentially. And I've arranged in 2 columns the dates, the colophons from each year. So the left is 738, and you'll notice the earliest juz in that column is number 11. It predates all the other juz that are part of that were done in the same year. And similarly, if you look at the second year, juz 19 dates several months before juz 18. This disorderly dates suggest that individual copyists of the Quran had access to earlier 30-volume sets, which were on shelves, we presume, and they simply reached for one volume and copied whatever came to hand without any particular order. A different scenario might have held in the case of the Uljaytu Quran, which was executed by a team of artists. The well-known illuminator Muhammad ibn Aybek signed volume 7. He must have been in charge of a team of illuminators, and his assistants, who worked on volumes 28 and 24 and 28, the unfinished ones, may simply not have been as proficient, nor as fast as the others. But this disorderly sequence also makes it difficult to estimate how long it took to complete a Quran manuscript. For example, if, as in the case of the Uljaytu Quran, juz 1 is dated 1306, and juz 7 has illumination dated 5 years later, we can't simply divide the 1 to 5 by 5 years and come up with 1 year per volume. It didn't necessarily take that time. Furthermore, the unfinished pages in Copenhagen and Leipzig show that the manuscript must have been endowed to the Sultan's tomb when it was still unfinished. The opening spreads from juz 1 in Leipzig and juz 7 in the top kappa have an endowment text around the decoration, and that's this text here and at the top, in a small but very fine script, saying that this juz, along with the others before it and after it in the 30 volumes, was endowed to the tomb, the word is rauda, in the pious foundation, Abwab al-Bir, that the Sultan had founded in Sultaniya. The city of Sultaniya, and it's underlined in red up there, was the new capital of the Il-Khanids in northwestern Iran, where the Sultan's tomb still stands, one of the largest brick domes ever built. The tomb is an enormous octagon with a rectangular room appended over the crypt at the back, and that's the entrance to the rectangular room there, and up here is the rectangular room. Descriptions by travelers to the site tell us that a metal grill once separated the octagonal hall in the center from the back room, which housed the cenotaph, also encased in a metal grill. A contemporary painting, right here in the Freer Gallery, from the great Mongol Shahnameh, helps us to envision the type of ceremonies that took place in the tomb at Sultaniya. The painting illustrates the mourning for the death of Alexander the Great, but it's set in a contemporary tomb, much like Uljaytu's at Sultaniya. It has a tiled dado. There's the dado right here behind the cenotaph, painted blue decoration at the top. In the middle is Alexander being mourned by his tutor Aristotle. The cenotaph is surrounded by lit by four large candlesticks of the type we know exactly from the period. There's no doubt that this is a contemporary illustration. The endowment deed to the pious foundation at Tabriz for Uljaytu's vizier Rashid ad-Din gives us details of the kind of ceremonies that took place in the tomb. Qur'an manuscripts were stored there, safely protected behind a screen secured with chains and strong locks to protect the precious objects inside. On the nights of Ramadan and other holy days, a trio took turns reciting the Qur'an round the clock near the screen of the tomb. At evening prayer, the tomb sweeper lit fresh beeswax candles and placed them in candlesticks in front of the reciters. He also put a little incense into a long-handled censer and wafted it about so that the perfume pervaded the tomb and sweetened the reciters' noses. Now, a very large Qur'an manuscript, and until we go to the exhibition and see how big this manuscript is, it's hard to imagine. It could not have been read in the way that we read a novel today, from beginning to end. Rather, the reciters must have recited the text from memory, and the enormous codices served rather as visible reminders of the Sultan's piety and his wealth. The Mongols cultivated monumentality in all their arts, and these Qur'an manuscripts were no exception. They also loved gold, which they deemed an imperial color. And should these enormous volumes have been brought out for special occasions, such as the anniversary of the Sultan's death, one has to imagine how the gold would have glittered as someone turned the pages in such a dim setting lit by smoky candles. And I show you here a clip from a YouTube video with Beate Wiesmüller actually turning the pages of this manuscript. Note how the gold ink reflects in the light. Note also the large sizes of the letters compared to her hand. We have no idea why the Uljaytu Qur'an was endowed to the tomb at Sultaniya while still unfinished. But it seems to have stayed there until the early 16th century, when the Ottoman Sultan, Suleiman the Magnificent, visited the city on his campaigns through the two Iraqs, accompanied by the court artist Nasuh Matrakchi. And if you don't know about this, you can watch the 48-part YouTube video now on Netflix instant download called The Magnificent Century, which is the life of Suleiman, and you can see Nasuh Matrakchi on screen. The artist presumably made sketches en route, and when back home in Istanbul, he worked up paintings for the manuscript of the Sultan's journeys, completed 3 years later. This double-page spread from Matrakchi's chronicle is the earliest known representation of Sultaniya. The chronicle gives no information about what the Ottoman entourage found there, but the Sultan, Suleiman, must have acquired folios from the Uljaytu Qur'an at that time, whether by purchase, bribe, gift, or other means. Several factors make it certain that it was Suleiman who took folios of the Uljaytu Qur'an back to Istanbul. One is the tight chronology. The codex on display here from the Turkve Islam Museum was already in the Ottoman capital within a decade after Suleiman's campaigns in Iraq, because as Zeren Taninde has pointed out, 9 folios are stamped with the seal of Suleiman's son, Mehmet, who died in 1543. One page in the codex also has a waqfiyah saying that the vizier Rustam Pasha endowed it to the prince's tomb in Shaban of 951 or October of 1544. Furthermore, the text in these selections of the Uljaytu Qur'an, now in Istanbul, also tie them to Sultan Suleiman. These folios in Istanbul combine sections from different juz, from different ajza, different volumes of the Qur'an. But they include many of the Qur'an's 6 references to the Prophet Solomon. And we heard last night about how the Qur'an builds on earlier precedents, earlier scriptures, and has reference to previous prophets. And Solomon, of course, is the namesake of Sultan Suleiman. For example, the codex on display here has this page from Juz 1, which describes Solomon's power, Mulk Suleiman, an appropriate reference to a powerful sultan called Suleiman, who had just returned from a world-conquering journey. Folios in another volume in the Turkve Islam Museum contain text from Surah 17, which mentions Solomon's power and knowledge. It's quite possible then that Suleiman actually asked for certain folios of the Quran because they are combined from different juz. Furthermore, Suleiman brought even more folios of the manuscript back to the Ottoman capital, but not all of them stayed there. Some must have been taken further on the campaigns to the west, where they were seized as war booty, and eventually bequeathed to libraries in Leipzig and Dresden, and I've indicated the position of Leipzig and Dresden just beyond Vienna. The codex in Leipzig was there already by 1694, and a later catalog even assumes that it was war booty taken from the camps of the Ottoman troops. Furthermore, as Simon Rettig has pointed out in his excellent entry in the catalog on this manuscript, the folios in Leipzig share text with exactly the same parts that are still in Istanbul. The binding, there are pages together that are shared between Istanbul and Leipzig from the same sections of the Quran. The binding in Leipzig also ties it to the period of Suleiman. The exterior is rather typical, but the interior, or doublures, have diamond-shaped stamps with the profession of faith and sacred names, a kind of script that became very popular, and we're talking about this here, during the period of Suleiman, used, for example, in this manuscript made for the Sultan by Ahmed Kara Hassari, not coincidentally on the same half-Baghdadi size sheets of paper that had already been used under the Il-Khanids. Other panels in square Kufik appear on the tomb of Sheikhzadeh Mehmet and on a spectacular ceremonial kaftan made for Sultan Suleiman. So we're talking again about these panels down here. Like the manuscript, this shirt, this ceremonial shirt, may have been taken on campaign to encourage God's aid in victory. But Suleiman did not take all of the folios from the Uljaytu Quran from Sultaniya, for some of them were still there a century later, when they were seen in situ by Adam Olearius, German secretary to an embassy to the Shah of Persia. Olearius visited Sultaniya in 1637. He describes the grill separating the tomb, and he says he saw several Arabic books there, more than half an L square, with letters as long as a man's finger and alternating lines black and gold. So there's no question, with black and gold, and remember Beata's finger next to the letters that were just about the same size. Olearius added that he took some folios, which he kept in the prince's library. And these are no doubt the folios that have now ended up in Copenhagen, which were part of the library, as he was part of the embassy of Frederick III of Gotthop, who was also the king of Denmark. But despite these peregrinations, mysteries, and histories of the Uljaytu Quran, there's still more. As with the previous manuscript, Sotheby's comes into the picture. In 1998, Sotheby's offered these two fragments for sale, each about 7 by 9 inches. I don't know who bought them. If anyone has any information, I would love to know where they are. But what's interesting is that they belong to Juz 6, a volume that is undocumented elsewhere. So to conclude, like the other imperial Quran manuscripts, the magnificent one transcribed for Sultan Uljaytu has had a long and rich history over the past 7 centuries. Commissioned to adorn the patron's mausoleum, its enormous size and its lavish decoration in glittering gold were appropriate attributes for a Mongol sultan to mark his piety as a new convert to Islam. But these characteristics of grandeur and gold made it appeal to others, ranging from the Ottoman Sultan to German ambassadors and contemporary collectors. Its function evolved as well, from a pious endowment to a prise de possession, an you got the point, accoutrement, a souvenir of war booty, and a museum masterpiece. This magnificent manuscript, like its contemporary imperial Qur'ans, can be read in many different ways. Thank you.